The hotel ballroom was already glowing before the sun went down. Tall glass windows reflected the city lights, and soft music floated through the room like a gentle breeze. Crystal glasses lined long tables covered in white cloth. Everything looked perfect, expensive, and carefully planned. This was the kind of place where every detail mattered, because every guest mattered at least to the people who belonged here. The party was private and exclusive. Only people with influence, money, or strong connections had been invited. Business owners, investors, and social figures moved around the room with confidence. Their voices were smooth, their laughter loud, and their posture proud. They spoke about deals, numbers, and future plans as if the world was something they owned together. At the center of it all was the host, a rich man known for his success and sharp tongue. He enjoyed being admired. He enjoyed being listened to even more. Wherever he stood, a small circle formed around him. People nodded at his words, laughed a little harder at his jokes, and waited for their turn to speak. He wore an expensive suit and carried himself like someone who never doubted his place in the room. Moving quietly between the guests was a young waitress. She wore a simple black uniform and flat shoes that made no sound on the polished floor. Her hair was tied neatly back. She kept her eyes low, focused on her tray, careful not to interrupt conversations that were clearly not meant for her. She had learned long ago that the best way to survive rooms like this was to be invisible. She had worked many events like this before. Rich parties, fancy weddings, business dinners. The faces changed, but the behavior stayed the same. Guests rarely looked at her face. Some snapped their fingers to get her attention. Others spoke to her without eye contact, as if she were part of the furniture. She did her job anyway. She always did. The ballroom had a grand piano placed near a small stage. It was large, black, and shining under the lights. It was there mostly for decoration. People admired it from a distance but paid it little attention. Music played softly through speakers instead. No one expected the piano to be used that night. The waitress noticed the piano as she passed by it several times. She did not stop or stare. She simply glanced at it for a moment longer than she should have, then kept walking. No one noticed. No one ever did. As the night went on, the guests became louder. Glasses were refilled again and again. Laughter echoed across the room. The rich man was in a particularly good mood. He told stories about his success, about deals that made him millions, about people who had failed because they were not smart enough or bold enough like him. Each story ended with praise for himself, and each one was met with applause. The waitress moved closer to his group to offer drinks. Her tray was full, and her arms were steady. As she reached out to hand a glass to one of the guests, someone shifted suddenly. A few drops spilled onto the tablecloth. It was nothing serious. The cloth was already meant to be replaced later. But the rich man noticed. He looked at the small spill and then at her. His smile faded into something sharper. He raised his voice just enough for the people around him to hear. "Careful," he said, slowly. "These glasses cost more than some people earn in a day." A few guests laughed softly. Others looked away, pretending not to notice. The waitress felt her face grow warm, but she did not react. She quickly cleaned the spill with a napkin and apologized in a calm voice. "I'm sorry, sir," she said. "It won't happen again." The rich man studied her for a moment, as if deciding whether she was worth more attention. Then he smiled again. "But this time it was not kind, of course," he said. "Just remember why you're here." The words hung in the air longer than they should have. The message was clear. She was there to serve. Nothing more. She nodded politely and stepped back, continuing her work. Her hands were steady, but inside, something tightened. Not anger, not sadness, just a familiar feeling she had learned to carry quietly. As she moved away, the conversation returned to normal. The guests forgot about her almost instantly. To them, the moment was small and unimportant. Just another joke, another reminder of who mattered and who didn't. The waitress continued serving drinks, collecting empty glasses, and walking from table to table. She listened to pieces of conversations without meaning to. Talks of wealth, power, and success filled the room. Everyone seemed certain of their place in life. She passed by the piano again. The light reflected off its surface, and for a brief second, she slowed her steps. Her fingers twitched slightly, as if remembering something old, something distant. Then she adjusted her grip on the tray and walked on. Near the edge of the ballroom, a few staff members whispered among themselves. They talked about how demanding the guests were, how long the night would be, how tired their feet already felt. The waitress did not join in. She simply listened and smiled faintly. She knew nights like this could be long. She knew they could also change quickly, sometimes in good ways, sometimes in bad. But she had learned not to expect anything. Expectation only made disappointment heavier. Across the room, the rich man raised his glass again and called for attention. His voice cut through the noise. People turned toward him, ready to listen. To success, he said, and to knowing your place in the world. More laughter followed. More glasses clinked together. The waitress stood near the wall, waiting for the next signal to move. Her face was calm, her posture straight. No one noticed the quiet strength in her stillness. The piano remained silent. The night continued, and no one in that room had any idea that something unexpected was already waiting, hidden behind simple clothes and a quiet presence. The night moved forward, but the feeling in the room had shifted, even if most people did not notice it. The laughter sounded a little sharper now, a little louder than necessary. Conversations overlapped as guests tried to be heard above one another. The air smelled of expensive perfume and wine, mixed with something less pleasant pride. The waitress continued her work without pause. She refilled glasses, cleared plates, and responded politely whenever someone spoke to her. Her face stayed calm, trained by years of practice. Inside, though, her thoughts were far from the room. She focused on steady breathing and small steps, one task at a time. That was how she always made it through long nights. The rich man was still enjoying the attention. He leaned back slightly, holding his glass as if it were a trophy. A group of guests listened closely as he spoke about risk, power, and success. He talked about people who didn't try hard enough and those who never rose above their limits. His words sounded confident, but there was something sharp beneath them, like a test no one dared to fail. The waitress approached again, this time to collect empty glasses from the table near him. She waited for a pause in the conversation, then stepped forward quietly. As she reached for a glass, the rich man stopped speaking and looked at her. "Do you hear this?" he asked the group, gesturing toward her without looking away. "This is what silence looks like. People who know when not to speak." A few guests laughed again. Some smiled awkwardly. Others shifted in their seats. The waitress froze for half a second, then picked up the glass and nodded politely. She said nothing. "That's good," he continued. "Knowing your limits is important. Not everyone is meant for the spotlight." The words were calm, but the message was heavy. The waitress felt it land, not just on her, but on the room. She took a step back, her grip tight on the tray. Her heart beat faster, but her face showed no sign of it. One guest cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable, but said nothing. Another checked his phone. The moment passed, and the conversation moved on as if nothing had happened. The waitress walked away, her steps controlled. She stopped near the side table and set the tray down. Her hands trembled slightly, so she pressed them against the edge of the table until they steadied. She had learned how to do this years ago. Let the feeling pass. Don't let it show. Nearby, another server glanced at her with concern. Their eyes met briefly. No words were exchanged, but understanding passed between them. They had both seen moments like this before. The rich man stood up and began walking through the room, glass still in hand. Guests turned toward him as he moved, ready to greet him, ready to agree. He enjoyed the attention. He enjoyed how easily people followed him. As he passed the piano, he stopped and tapped the edge of it lightly. "Such a beautiful thing," he said loudly. "Shame it's just sitting there." Someone joked about hiring a musician. Another laughed and said the piano probably cost more than their car. The rich man smiled, then looked around the room. "Well," he said, "talent is rare. Not everyone has it." His eyes moved across the guests, then briefly toward the staff along the wall. They did not linger, but the message was clear. Some people were meant to create, others were meant to serve. The waitress stood with the other staff members, her back straight, her expression neutral. She did not look at the piano now. She kept her gaze forward. Time passed. Plates emptied. Bottles ran low. The music from the speakers continued, soft and steady, filling the spaces between conversations. The party seemed smooth on the surface, but beneath it, tension slowly built. At one point, a guest requested a specific drink. The waitress moved quickly to prepare it. When she returned, the guest took a sip and frowned. "This isn't right," he said. She apologized immediately and offered to replace it. As she reached to take the glass back, the rich man noticed again. "Careful," he said with a laugh. "We don't want another accident this time." The laughter was thinner. A few guests did not laugh at all. The waitress replaced the drink and apologized once more. Her voice remained steady, but her chest felt tight. She stepped away, feeling eyes on her back. As she walked toward the service area, her thoughts wandered to a different time. A quieter room, wooden floors, a piano that wasn't just for decoration. She pushed the memory aside. This was not the place for that. In the service area, the manager spoke in a low voice to the staff. He mentioned that the scheduled pianist had sent a message earlier, saying there might be a delay due to travel issues. Nothing was certain yet. The waitress listened without reacting. She simply nodded and returned to work. Back in the ballroom, the rich man raised his voice again, telling another story. This one was about a person who once worked for him and failed. Some people just don't have what it takes, he said. You can give them opportunities, but they stay exactly where they belong. The words drifted across the room. The waitress heard them clearly. She paused near the wall, holding a stack of clean glasses. For a moment, she closed her eyes, then opened them again. She reminded herself why she was here. To work, to earn, to get through the night. As the evening wore on, the guests grew more relaxed, but the rich man grew louder. His jokes became sharper, his comments more direct. Each time, he seemed to look toward the staff, as if expecting a reaction, but the waitress gave him none. She moved with quiet focus, doing her job with care. Every step, every motion, controlled. She refused to give him the satisfaction of discomfort. Still, something inside her shifted. Not anger, not sadness, something firmer. A quiet resolve she hadn't felt in a long time. Near the end of the hour, the music from the speakers stopped suddenly. A few guests looked around in confusion. The manager hurried toward the stage, whispering to another staff member. The piano sat in silence, untouched. The rich man noticed the pause and smiled. Well, he said, raising his voice, this should be interesting. The waitress stood near the edge of the room, watching quietly. The night was far from over, and the attention she had tried so hard to avoid was slowly, inevitably, moving closer. The sudden silence made people uneasy. Without the background music, every sound felt louder. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. Glasses clinked. A few guests cleared their throats, waiting for someone to explain what was happening. The manager stepped onto the small stage with a tight smile. He thanked everyone for their patience and spoke briefly about a technical issue. He mentioned that the pianist had been delayed and would arrive later if possible. His words were careful, but uncertainty filled the room. The rich man tilted his head and let out a short laugh. No music at a party like this, he said. That's disappointing. Some guests nodded in agreement. Others looked relieved to have something new to focus on. The pause gave the rich man another chance to take control of the room. He glanced around, then toward the staff standing along the wall. His eyes stopped briefly on the waitress. Well, he said, raising his voice, since we're waiting, maybe someone here would like to entertain us. A few people laughed, thinking it was a joke. Someone else added, maybe one of the servers can play. More laughter followed, louder this time. The waitress felt her stomach tighten. She kept her eyes forward, her face calm. She had heard comments like this before, meant to sound harmless, but carrying sharp edges. The rich man smiled wider. What about you? He said, pointing directly at her. You've been so quiet all night. Do you play? The room grew still. Several guests turned to look at her, curious now. Some expected her to laugh it off. Others expected embarrassment. She hesitated for just a moment. I do, she said softly. The words surprised even her. A few people chuckled, assuming she was joking. You do? The rich man repeated, clearly amused. What? A little tune. She met his gaze briefly, then looked toward the piano. Yes, she said again. I can play. The laughter faded. Whispers moved through the room. The manager looked startled and stepped closer, unsure of what to say. The rich man raised an eyebrow. Well, he said, spreading his hands, this should be interesting. Go on. There was challenge in his voice, not encouragement. The waitress felt every eye on her. Her heart beat hard in her chest. She could have stepped back. She could have apologized and returned to work. That would have been easier. But something inside her had already decided. She handed her tray to another server and walked toward the piano. Each step felt heavy, but steady. The room stayed silent, waiting. She stopped beside the piano and rested her hand lightly on its smooth surface. The feel of it sent a small rush through her, like greeting an old friend after many years. She sat down slowly on the bench. The lights above seemed brighter now. She adjusted the seat, placed her feet carefully on the floor, and took a deep breath. For a moment, she did nothing, Then she placed her fingers on the keys. The first note filled the room, clear and strong. Conversation stopped completely. Heads turned fully toward the stage. She began gently, letting the melody grow naturally. Her hands moved with confidence, not hesitation. Each note followed the next as if they had been waiting all night to be heard. The sound changed the room. The sharp edges of laughter and pride softened. The noise faded into stillness. She played with feeling, not show. The music carried warmth, memory, and quiet strength. It spoke without words. Guests who had been checking their phones set them down. Glasses were forgotten midair. Even the staff along the wall stood frozen, watching. The rich man's smile slowly disappeared. He straightened in his chair, eyes fixed on the stage. This was not what he had expected. The waitress played on. Her face was calm, focused. She was no longer in the ballroom. She was somewhere else now, somewhere safe. A small room from years ago. A piano that didn't shine but sounded just as true. She remembered long evenings practicing until her fingers ached. A teacher correcting her posture. A dream that once felt so close. The music rose and fell, filling every corner of the space. It carried sadness and hope together, balanced and honest. Some guests shifted in their seats, moved in ways they didn't quite understand. One woman quietly wiped her eyes. Another leaned forward, listening closely. The rich man glanced around, noticing the change. The attention was no longer on him. When the final notes faded, the silence returned, but it felt different now, full, heavy, for a heartbeat. No one spoke. Then someone began to clap. Another joined in. Then another. Soon the room filled with applause, growing louder and louder. People stood up, surprised by their own reaction. The sound echoed against the walls. The waitress stood slowly, stepping away from the piano. She bowed her head slightly, unsure where to look. The rich man remained seated for a moment, his expression unreadable. He clapped last, slower than the others. "Well," he said finally, standing. "I didn't expect that." The words were careful now, controlled. The manager hurried over, thanking her quietly. Several guests approached the stage, offering praise and questions. The waitress listened politely, still trying to steady her breathing. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept them at her sides. The rich man watched from a distance, his glass untouched. The night had shifted, and everyone in the room felt it. Nothing would be the same after this. The applause slowly faded, but the feeling it left behind stayed strong. People were still standing, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others smiling as if they had just witnessed something rare. The party no longer felt loud or careless. It felt thoughtful, almost quiet in a new way. The waitress stepped away from the piano and moved toward the side of the room, unsure of what she was supposed to do next. Her legs felt light, as if she had been walking for a long time without realizing it. She returned to the wall where the staff usually waited, placing herself back into the role she knew so well. But the room did not allow her to disappear this time. Guests began approaching her one by one. Some thanked her softly. Others said they hadn't expected such beauty in a place like this. A few asked where she had learned to play. She answered politely but briefly, her voice still calm, her eyes steady. She did not brag. She did not explain more than necessary. The manager stayed close, clearly unsure how to handle the sudden attention. He smiled nervously, nodding along, thanking guests as if the performance had been planned all along. Across the room, the rich man watched everything. His face was stiff, his jaw tight. He lifted his glass but did not drink. The people who had surrounded him earlier were now scattered, pulled toward the woman by the piano. For the first time that night, he felt the loss of attention. He walked slowly toward her, each step measured. Conversations quieted as people noticed him approaching. The space around them opened without effort. "You surprised us," he said, his voice lower now. She looked at him and nodded. "Thank you," she replied. He studied her face, as if searching for something. Maybe pride, maybe challenge. He found neither. "I didn't know," he said after a pause. She did not respond right away. "Most people don't," she said finally. The words were simple, but they landed hard. There was a moment of silence between them. Then someone nearby cleared their throat, breaking the tension. The rich man stepped back, forcing a thin smile. "Well," he said, louder now, "talent really does come from unexpected places." A few guests nodded. Others exchanged glances. The comment felt unfinished, almost empty. The party resumed, but it was not the same. Conversations shifted. People spoke more quietly. Some discussed the music. Others reflected on what they had seen. The earlier confidence had softened. The waitress returned to work, though her tasks felt different now. Guests looked at her face when they spoke. Some said her name from the tag on her uniform. A few asked her opinion on things, small things, but things that mattered. She answered kindly. But she did not linger. She kept moving, keeping herself grounded. The rich man stood with the smaller group now. His voice was controlled, careful. He laughed less. He watched the room instead of leading it. At one point, he caught her looking toward the piano again. Not longing, just awareness. Later in the evening, the delayed pianist finally arrived. He stood near the stage, unsure whether to play. The manager spoke with him quietly, then waved him off for the night. The piano remained silent. Guests began preparing to leave. Coats were collected. Final drinks were poured. Goodbyes were exchanged. Several people approached the waitress before leaving. One spoke about a small private event. Another mentioned a community space that hosted music nights. They asked if she would ever consider playing again. She listened, thanked them, and said she would think about it. The rich man lingered near the exit, watching these interactions. When the room had thinned, he approached her once more. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. She looked at him, surprised but calm. "I shouldn't have spoken the way I did earlier," he continued. "It was unfair." She considered his words. "Thank you for saying that," she said. "I accept," he nodded, relief mixed with something else. Regret, perhaps. They stood there briefly, two people from very different worlds, now sharing a moment neither had planned out. As the last guests left, the lights dimmed slightly. Staff began clearing the room. The waitress picked up empty glasses, returning to familiar motions. But inside, something had changed. She passed the piano one last time before heading out. She rested her hand on it briefly, then walked away. The night ended quietly, yet its impact stayed behind, echoing in ways no one could ignore. The ballroom looked different in the early morning light. The shine was still there, but the magic of the night had faded. Chairs were stacked, tables cleared, and the floor showed signs of long hours and many footsteps. The echoes of laughter and music were gone, replaced by quiet movements and tired breaths. The waitress finished her last task and placed the final glass on the tray. Her shift was almost over. Her body felt tired in the usual way, but her mind was awake, alert, and full. She changed out of her uniform and stepped into the hallway, holding her bag close outside. The city was calmer. The air felt cooler. She took a deep breath and began walking toward the bus stop, just like she did after every late shift. But tonight felt different. As she walked, her thoughts replayed the night. Not the insult, not the laughter, but the silence after the music, the look on people's faces, the feeling of being seen, truly seen, even if only for a moment. She reached the bus stop and sat down. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed. A message from the manager. He thanked her again and said several guests had asked about her. He mentioned possible opportunities. Nothing certain, just interest. She read the message twice, then slipped the phone back into her bag. She did not smile right away. She had learned not to rush joy. At home, she made a cup of tea and sat by the window. The room was small, quiet, and familiar. Against one wall stood an old keyboard, covered lightly with dust. She uncovered it and ran her fingers over the keys. They were worn, but still true. She played softly, just for herself. No audience, no pressure, just sound and memory. The next few days passed slowly. She returned to work as usual. Some co-workers treated her the same. Others looked at her with new respect. A few asked questions. She answered kindly, but kept her focus. Then the messages began. One came from a woman who hosted small charity events. Another from someone who managed a local cafe known for quiet music nights. There were no promises, no big offers, just doors opening slightly. She considered each one carefully. One evening, after another long shift, she sat across from the rich man in a quiet office. He had requested a private meeting through the manager. She had almost said no, but curiosity won. He looked different without the crowd, quieter, less certain. "I wanted to thank you again," he said, "and to apologize properly." She listened. "I've spent a long time believing success meant control," he continued. "That night reminded me how wrong that can be." She nodded, not agreeing or disagreeing, just listening. "I can't change what I said," he added, "but I can change how I act going forward." She appreciated the honesty. She did not offer forgiveness or praise. She simply thanked him for the conversation. They parted without promises. Weeks passed. She accepted a small invitation to play at a community space. The room was modest. the piano slightly out of tune. But the people listened. She played again and again. The audience grew slowly, not in size, but in connection. People came to hear her because of how the music made them feel, not because of where she came from. She still worked as a waitress. She still wore the uniform. But she no longer felt invisible. One night, after a small performance, a young server approached her and said, "I didn't know we were allowed to be more than this." She smiled gently. "We always were," she said. Months later, she passed by the hotel where it had all happened. The lights were on again. Another event. Another crowd. She did not go inside. She walked on, carrying something quieter and stronger than approval. The story of that night spread in small ways, not as a headline, not as a viral moment, but as a reminder passed from person to person. Talent does not wear a uniform. Worth does not ask permission. And sometimes, the strongest voice in the room belongs to the one who waited patiently for the right moment to speak.